Hi, my name is Shannon Brewer. I'm an attorney with Hill and Ponton, and today I want to talk to you about VA survivor benefits that are available for families of veterans after the death of a veteran. I very often speak to a family member after the death of a disabled veteran and find that they are in a hard spot financially, either because they weren't aware that the veteran's disability benefits would stop at the death of a veteran, or because the veteran's death just wasn't expected so soon and they're not prepared for that. So that's really very normal, but it's just not what you need when you're already struggling with so many changes and you have to add unexpected financial stresses on top of that. So I'd like to go over what kind of benefits are available for the survivors, who is entitled to them, and what you need to do to get them. So we'll talk about dependency and indemnity compensation, which is also usually you're going to hear that called DIC. We're going to talk about the survivor's pension, and we're going to talk about burial benefits today. I think the most important point that I can make and to emphasize for you is that survivors do not keep getting the veteran's benefit. At the veteran's death, his or her disability benefit stops. As you know, at that point, a qualifying survivor can apply for their own benefits, but you should know that the amount of the VA disability benefit and the amount of the survivor's benefit are not going to always be the same. They're not ever going to be the same. The survivor's benefit is usually less, so you have to be prepared for that. I think the base rate for DIC for spouses is currently around $1,500 per month, whereas a 100% disabled spouse is getting close to $4,000 per month. You should also know that what we're talking about today is survivor's benefits. But if a veteran dies with claims or appeals still pending, those are different. A qualifying survivor can step in and substitute into those claims or appeals within a year of the veteran's death. And if they're successful and they win those claims, they're going to be entitled to whatever benefit the veteran should have been paid prior to his death or her death. Those benefits, sometimes you'll hear them called accrued benefits. That's also something that you should be aware of. But those are benefits that were owed to the veteran. They're not the survivor's benefits. So what we're going to focus on today is the benefits that the survivor is entitled to. So let's start with the DIC benefits. DIC is available to a survivor in a couple of different circumstances. One, if the veteran is 100% disabled for 10 years prior to his or her death, or two, if the veteran's service-connected disability is the cause of death, or if it contributes to their death. The 10 years at 100% is pretty straightforward, and VA usually will grant that very easily, but you do have to apply. So they're not going to come to you and tell you you're entitled to this benefit. You have to fill out the VA's application for DIC benefits. And now, cause of death can be a little bit more complicated. It isn't always. If the veteran is service-connected for a heart disability, and that's their cause of death, and that's listed on their death certificate, it's an easy claim for VA to grant. But if it's more complicated, where you're talking about one condition causing another, which would eventually cause the veteran's death, then you still should apply for that. But in those cases, you may need a doctor's opinion to make the connections for the VA so they can grant it. And it's important to think outside the box here. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I had a veteran or a spouse whose veteran's death certificate stated accidental overdose. And, on the surface of it, he's not service connected for that. It doesn't look like, but the pain medication that he overdosed on accidentally was one that he was given for a service connected orthopedic problem. VA did eventually grant that, but they didn't do it right off the bat. So we had to get a doctor involved to make those connections. I also had a veteran once whose official cause of death was listed as something related to a brain trauma. But in reality, what happened is that he had Parkinson's, which was service-connected, and he fell. VA did eventually grant that as a service-connected cause of death as well. But again, VA is not necessarily going to jump through those hoops. You have to look at it and see what makes sense. And if you don't know, ask the veteran's doctor if there's a relationship between the service-connected conditions and the cause of death. You might not be aware that the stroke was caused by the service-connected hypertension or something like that. So it's important to go ahead and get information on whether the relationship between the service-connected conditions and the official cause of death, what that relationship is. Have a medical opinion. Get someone to help you with that if you don't know. So next, we'll talk about who's entitled to DIC benefits. A qualifying survivor, and that can be a spouse, can be a child, or it can be a dependent parent. And we'll dive a little more into that. For a parent to be considered a qualifying survivor, they have to have a parent relationship with the veteran. Can't be an in-law, can't be a grandparent. It needs to be a parent. And they have to show that they were financially dependent on the veteran. This comes down to their financial situation. So, you're going to have to present records that show that you were financially dependent on that veteran. You're going to have to show what the veteran was contributing. And just know there are also income eligibility requirements. So if you can make too much money to qualify as a dependent parent. For a child to qualify, the child has to be a biological child or an adopted child or a stepchild of the veteran. And they still have to be a dependent as well. So that child has to be either under 18 to, I believe, 23 and in school, or a helpless child. And a helpless child is a legal determination. It's a child who became incapable of supporting themselves before they reach the age of 18. So that child would also count as a dependent. And finally, so you've got the dependent parents, you've got children, and then you also have the surviving spouse. And that's not as simple as it might seem immediately. There's requirements for that as well. So a surviving spouse can be someone who was married to a service member who died while serving. It can be someone who was married to a veteran for at least a year, or someone who married the veteran and had a child any time during the marriage. So even if the marriage was not a year, if they had a child with the veteran and they lived with the veteran until their death, in general, those are the rules. The spouse cannot have remarried, although, there's always exceptions to any rule. There's exceptions to that as well. If you were over the age of 57 when you remarried, then your benefits can continue. You can still receive DIC benefits at that point. I would say don't assume that you don't qualify as a surviving spouse. Just to give you some benefits of exceptions that I have seen VA grant benefits based on common law marriage, even in states where common law marriage is not recognized. If the veteran and the spouse are not aware that common law marriage isn't recognized, and they're presenting themselves as a married couple to their community, if they banked together, they bought houses together, they bought cars together, they lived together, that counts. If the veteran, was married, thought they had a divorce, the divorce didn't go through, they remarried, they weren't aware that that second marriage wasn't valid, then it can count. So you don't want to just count yourself out. I know of a couple of cases where the spouse is actually divorced and were still entitled to DIC benefits. So in one case, they divorced, they changed their minds, they continued to live together. They never actually moved out. They reconciled and they continued to live as a married couple. So even though they were legally divorced, VA then agreed to infer that marriage was still valid, and they awarded DIC benefits based on that. So the thing to remember is it's very, very fact specific. If you need to pull through your records and see what you can show about your joint finances, get a buddy statement, have a community member. I remember having a pastor say, they attended church together every week, and they presented themselves. I assumed they were married. They presented themselves as a married couple. So you can get friends, family, neighbors, people that you did business with. They can give a buddy statement and help you. So it's very fact specific, and you have to prove the facts of your case and show that your relationship specifically should count as a marriage. And VA will look at those. They're difficult to win, but they are winnable. Okay, let's talk briefly about a few other benefits for survivors. One that you may have heard of is the survivor pension. I also hear people refer to that as the death pension. It's a benefit that's payable to an unmarried surviving spouse of a veteran with wartime service. So the wartime service is required for that. And if you don't have that, you don't qualify for that. Another important thing to know about the pension is that it is income based. So if you have more than $10,000 income, you are probably not going to qualify for that benefit. It is tax free. So that's something else to know. But if you qualify for DIC, that's going to be a better benefit. But if you can't qualify for DIC and you do have the limited income, the survivor's pension, the death pension is an option for you. And it certainly could help. Another benefit that we haven't talked about yet are burial benefits. VA has burial allowances. I believe they're paid at a flat rate. So they're going to cover things like funeral expenses, headstones, grave sites. It's a flat amount of money that they would provide. The last I understood about this benefit, you do not have to apply for it. As soon as VA is informed that a veteran has died who qualifies, they will go ahead and award that. They have to have had an honorable or general discharge. They cannot have had a dishonorable discharge. Their death has to be service connected, or they have to be receiving disability compensation or pension at the time of their death. Or I believe also you can qualify for that burial allowance if you were in a VA hospital or nursing home at the time of your death. Also, if you were retired and chose to get that benefit instead of your disability benefit, there's also a burial allowance there as well. And finally, the last benefit I wanted to talk about is the CHAMP VA. And that benefit is a healthcare benefit. You're not going to qualify for that if you qualify for TRICARE, so you can't get both of those. But the CHAMP VA it helps with healthcare costs for family members. If the veteran was totally disabled, or if, again, a lot of these benefits require you to have a service-connected cause of death. So it can be either or, if you were permanently disabled and totally disabled prior to your death, or if you had a service-connected condition that was the cause of death. I guess the main thing I want to say to you is that when you're grieving is not the time to start looking into these things. So I would always encourage veterans and their family members, be aware of what's available to you and what you need to do to get those benefits, to make this process as easy as possible when you need it to be. Thanks.